Ambassador Mahbubani, I know you've been really rather unequivocal in your prediction that in the next 5 to 10 years, that the tension between the United States and China will only escalate, and you sort of alluded to that again when you were trying to put Hong Kong into the context in your sharing earlier. There was another very erudite scholar that I very much like, who is Professor Richard Wolff, an American economist from, I think, the University of I forgot the university he's from, but he went even bolder in his prediction of the endgame of the US-China contest. He basically said that sanity will prevail in the United States, and eventually there will be a future American leader who would say, okay, this is enough. China is not a force we can contain, and it's only rational for us to try to negotiate with them for peaceful coexistence. Pretty much like what Britain did almost 250 years ago, when its then Prime Minister, Lord Rockingham, began to seek peace terms with the American colonies, and which ultimately led to the recognition of American independence in the Treaty of Paris. Although I have to add that in that case there was a war, unfortunately, involved anyway. My question is, do you agree with Professor Wolff's prediction, or do you think that a peaceful endgame would more depend on China being tamed as it realizes, okay, the US is such a formidable force that to which we would have to defer to a certain extent? What's your view?
Well, I must say I haven't heard of Richard Wolff, but I want him to be right and I want me to be wrong. I would be very happy to live in a world where the United States and China decide, okay, this is not rational, we should actually get along with each other. Because that's what I recommend at the end of my book as China Won.
I'm sorry, I'm listening to Richard Wolff right here. I'm sorry.
That was quick.
I was just listening to the guy. I apologize.
I'll try to listen to him also after this. But you see, the reason I can confidently predict that things will get worse is because there's a rock-solid consensus in the Washington, D.C. establishment that this is the time when the United States has to stop China. And the evidence is there, right? There are tariffs imposed on China, there are sanctions imposed on China, there are speeches against China, there is Kamala Harris saying that we will be number one, we will not let China overtake. So the conviction that the United States should stay ahead of China is very, very powerful. So it will not change overnight. But if indeed he's right and US and China stop competing and start getting along, I'll be the happiest man in the world, because that's my dream.
He's from the University of Massachusetts. Eddie, Tam, you have the last question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Brilliant lecture. I also went to your lecture at the CCCW. I'm a fund manager and I'm an amateur commentator on world affairs in Hong Kong. It's a follow-up question almost to this gentleman's questions. I remember at the CCW you mentioned that US is not going to change, so it's up to China. I think this is a response to Professor Li Chen's question. Like you said it's up to China to decide how to respond to the US challenge, and you said if China were very confident that they will overtake the US in 10 years' time, 20 years' time in terms of GDP, I think you mentioned, then you would counsel patience. They should be very patient with, I guess, Taiwan, with Philippines, with the provocation by the U.S., etc. Well, my question is, what if China were not so confident? Then would you counsel them being impatient and take preemptive actions against Taiwan, Philippines, India, and seek more provocation provoke even the U.S. And also one point on GDP, I think you obviously know that in terms of PPP GDP, China overtook the U.S. like almost a dozen years ago. It's only in nominal GDP terms that China is behind. But also I make the observation that in fact the gap has widened back out. I think the peak was 80% of US nominal GDP about 2 years ago. It's now back down to 65%. And mainly that's because of not only slowing growth in China, but because of deflation, which is a forbidden word in China, and also depreciation of the renminbi. So in my mind, actually, I don't know how patient China has been, because I think U.S. Tariffs and trade sanctions, technological sanctions have done a lot of damage. But I think, in my humble opinion, I think China has also damaged itself through its own policies. Beating up big tech. Somehow they think only hardware is tech, software is not tech, and then the property mess and so on. Which they didn't burst the property bubble. They just killed the private developers. Good things. Ronnie is surviving very well, But so in my opinion, I don't think China has been that patient. But in particular, if they were not that confident that they will overtake the U.S., would you counsel them impatience then?
I never counsel impatience. Because it's not just between US and China. I keep emphasizing that the world is changing. That you're seeing not just the relative decline of the United States, relatively speaking. United States will still remain a formidable power, by the way. Never underestimate the United States.
Agree.
But the United States' capacity to get the world to agree to it in the way that it could in the past is diminishing. And the emergence of what I call the multi-civilizational, multipolar, multilateral world is good for China. And so if the forces of world history are moving in your direction, then you can be patient, right? This is not going to be an American century again. This will be the Asian century. So if indeed the tide was going against China, yes, maybe you might counsel something else. But the global tide is going in favor of China and all the other countries, many of them in the global south. So there's no reason for China to get impatient at this stage. Of course, its domestic development is critical. And the most important thing for China is to ensure that it keeps growing its economy at least 5% a year. Because that is China's long-term answer to America's challenge. And if they can keep on doing that through whatever means, pragmatically make adjustments, change policies, go back to Deng Xiaoping's maxim, doesn't matter whether a cat is black, a cat is white, if it catches mice, it is a good cat. That kind of pragmatism that China has shown, if that kind of pragmatism can be reinforced, then China will be okay. But on the side of the United States, I would also encourage the United States to engage in some fresh thinking. And my successor as Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Professor Danny Kwa, has just published an article in Foreign Policy, which is a letter to the next president of the United States. And the message to the next president is, please don't worry. Even if you're not number one, it's not the end of the world. Just relax and accept it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't know that to be a political analyst can be a rock star, but ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for the rock star of geopolitics.